While many battles were fought in the war to gain civil rights for all Americans, the battle for equal housing against racially restrictive covenants was a major undertaking in the 1920s to late 1960s, which successfully gave all races the right to live wherever they wanted, and the responsibility to face injustice as well as prevent it from reoccurring in our society. After slavery ended, many African Americans stayed and worked on plantations where they were once slaves. They were promised 40 acres of land and a mule, but that was never to be. The work was just as hard as it was in slavery. Fear of violence, poor housing, little food, and poverty were the same too. As African American soldiers came home from serving their country in World War I, many did not want to go back into sharecropping and farm life on plantations. Many migrated to the north and west seeking better housing, work, and good quality of life. The Great Migration brought African Americans into cities and towns, once exclusively meant for whites. Not everyone was happy about it. Whites felt threatened by the increasing number of African Americans in their communities, and the release of the movie The Birth of a Nation in 1915 made things worse. Whites passed laws to keep minorities out of their communities. This includes Asians, Indians, Mexicans, Jews, and Catholics, but the first and foremost was African Americans. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, which was started in 1909, rose up to fight the racially discriminatory laws. In 1917, the United States Supreme Court declared racially biased zoning unconstitutional. In the case Buchanan v. Warley, the Supreme Court found that Louisville, Kentucky's racial zoning ordinance violated the 14th Amendment's Due Protection Clause and blocked contractual freedom because it stopped private property sales between whites and blacks. The decision only applied to legal statutes, not private agreements, so communities resorted to racially restrictive covenants. Racially restrictive covenants were contractual agreements that prohibited the purchase, lease, or occupation of a piece of property by a particular group of people, usually African Americans. They became common after 1926 after the United States Supreme Court decision Corrigan v. Buckley legalized their use. In 1934, the Federal Housing Administration was created. The Federal Housing Administration, or FHA, created our current financial mortgaging system. It produced a lending criteria that helped to perpetuate the racial segregation that still exists today. The underwriting handbook used by the FHA endorsed the practicing of redlining, which marked African American neighborhoods as ineligible for FHA mortgages. Redlining is a practice of refusing to back mortgages in neighborhoods based on racial and ethnic composition. In 1937, the Housing Act, or Wagner-Steagall Act, established the United States Housing Administration, responsible for building publicly subsidized housing. This is low-income housing projects where many minorities could afford housing when they cannot buy overpriced homes in affluent neighborhoods or cannot get an FHA loan. These turned into ghettos with poverty, overcrowding, crimes, and buildings that were not maintained. In 1948, in the case of Shelley v. Kramer fought by Thurgood Marshall and other NAACP lawyers, the Supreme Court found that while racially biased restrictive covenants are not themselves unconstitutional, enforcement of the covenants is illegal. Therefore, the black family named Shelley, who purchased a home in St. Louis, Missouri in 1945, without knowing that there was a racially restrictive covenant on the property, cannot be made to move by the state of Missouri. The play, A Raisin in the Sun, was based on playwright Lorraine Hansberry's family's personal experience battling against racial restrictive covenants in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm from the Clybourne Park Improvement Association, and we had it brought to our attention at the last meeting that you people, or at least your mother, has bought a piece of residential property. Now, our association is prepared through the collective efforts of our people to buy the house from you at a financial gain to your family.
We have all thought about your offer, and we've decided to move into our house. Because my father, he earned it brick by brick. We don't want your money. Now, we don't intend to cause no trouble or fight no causes, and we're gonna try to be good neighbors.
Well, now I don't understand why you people are reacting this way. I mean, what do you think you're gonna gain by moving into a neighborhood where you just aren't wanted?
Private citizens could voluntarily adhere to racially based restrictive covenants. However, state enforcement, including judicial enforcement of racially based restrictive covenants, however, is discriminatory, and it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Segregated housing contributed to segregated schools, stores, churches, and workplaces, because unless you have a car or access to reliable public transportation, people tend to work, worship, shop, and socialize where they live. The Civil Rights Act of 1966 prohibited discrimination in housing. However, there were no federal enforcement provisions. The 1968 Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, also known as the Federal Fair Housing Act, expanded on previous acts and prohibited discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, sex, handicap, and family status.
Now with this bill, the voice of justice speaks again. It proclaims that fair housing for all who live in this country is now a part of the American way of life.
The Federal Fair Housing Act made redlining and the practice of writing racial covenants into deeds illegal. Despite the passing of the Federal Fair Housing Act, discrimination in housing persists. In 1988, the Boston branch of the NAACP filed a class action lawsuit against the Boston Housing Authority for maintaining racially segregated public housing through the use of site-specific waiting lists. Although a lot of progress has been made, the recent housing crisis and foreclosures in the U.S. put a spotlight on discriminatory mortgage lending practices that are still occurring today. Today, there are still communities that have sentences in their neighborhood's residential covenants that exclude different types of people from living there. Although it's no longer enforceable as the law, because it is illegal, the words are a part of the historical records and are still in the deeds of the homes in those communities. Some people believe that the deeds should be changed to take out the restrictions, but others, including the NAACP, believe that the language should stay as a reminder of how far America has come in the fight for civil rights, and to remind Americans that they have responsibility to prevent it from happening again. Today you see people of all races, religions, family status, and ethnic backgrounds living together harmoniously. This couldn't have happened without people fighting to make the world a fair and equal place. Without Thurgood Marshall and other civil rights activists, nothing would be equal. Non-Caucasians would still be treated differently than Caucasians, and America would still be separated and unequal. And sometimes they still are.